Most of what makes your life feel heavy has almost nothing to do with your actual problems. It's the effort of pretending you don't have them. Carl Jung noticed this long before anyone was using words like burnout or mental load. That a person could have a perfectly manageable life on paper and still wake up every single morning feeling like they were dragging something invisible behind them, up a staircase that never ended. You know the feeling I'm describing. You get through the day, you handle what needs handling, you answer when people ask how you are. And underneath all of it, there's this low, constant hum of exhaustion that doesn't match anything you actually did. You didn't run a marathon. You didn't survive a catastrophe. You just lived a normal Tuesday. So why does it feel like you carried a piano up 3 flights of stairs? Jung spent a good part of his life sitting across from people who couldn't answer that question. They weren't in crisis. Many of them were successful, capable, admired. But they were tired in a way that sleep didn't fix. And what Jung eventually understood was that the tiredness wasn't coming from their lives. It was coming from the enormous, unrelenting effort it took to keep certain things hidden from other people, and more importantly, from themselves. He put it in a way that still lands like a stone dropped into still water. Until you make the unconscious conscious, he wrote, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That fate, that heaviness you keep calling just how life is often nothing more than the accumulated weight of everything you've refused to look at directly. Today I want to walk you through what Jung actually understood about this weight, where it comes from, the one small, almost embarrassingly simple habit he believed could start lifting it almost immediately, and why something this simple turns out to be one of the hardest things a human being ever learns to do. Let's start with the weight itself, because you have to understand what you're carrying before you can understand how to set it down. Imagine you're holding a bag, not a heavy one, just an ordinary bag, the kind you'd carry groceries in. Now imagine you've been holding it for 11 hours. Your arm stopped registering it as a distinct object hours ago. It's not that the bag got heavier, it's that holding anything, even something light, becomes unbearable when you never allow yourself to put it down. That's what suppression does to a psyche. The individual feeling isn't the problem. The refusal to ever set it down is. And here's the part almost nobody realizes. Suppression is not passive. When you push a feeling out of awareness, you don't get rid of it. You assign a part of yourself to hold it there, permanently, using energy, 24 hours a day, whether you're awake or asleep. Jung understood the psyche as an energetic system. Every emotion you've decided is unacceptable, every truth you've decided not to know, every version of yourself you've decided to hide, each one requires a guard posted at the door. And you're paying every one of those guards out of the same limited account for years. That's the invisible thing dragging behind you. It's not your circumstances. It's the standing army you've hired to keep your own inner life out of sight. Think about someone who spent 15 years being the strong one in their family, the person everyone calls when things fall apart. Somewhere along the way, they decided that their own fear, their own need, their own exhaustion were things nobody could ever see. So they built a wall around those parts. And now, even alone, even at 3 in the morning when no one is watching, they can't relax. Because the wall doesn't come down just because the audience left. The performance has become automatic. They're guarding an empty room and calling the fatigue a personality trait. This is where Jung's insight gets genuinely useful, because he didn't just diagnose the problem, he identified the specific move that starts to reverse it. And it's so simple that when I tell you, part of you is going to be disappointed. The habit is this: telling yourself the truth about what you actually feel. That's it. Not fixing the feeling, not solving whatever caused it, not talking yourself into a better mood. Just the quiet, private, deliberate act of admitting to yourself what is genuinely happening inside you, in plain language, without dressing it up or arguing it down. I said you'd be disappointed. It sounds like nothing. It sounds like the kind of advice that costs nothing because it's worth nothing. But sit with it for a second, because Jung understood something about this move that the surface simplicity completely hides. The moment you accurately name what you feel, you relieve the guard at the door. There's no longer anything to suppress, because the thing you were suppressing is now out in the open, seen, acknowledged, allowed to exist. The energy that was holding it down comes flooding back to you, and that returning energy is what you experience as lightness. Here's how it looks in the smallest possible terms. You're driving home. Your hands are tight on the wheel and your jaw aches. And you've been telling yourself all day that you're fine, just busy, just a lot going on. And instead of that, you say to yourself, out loud or silently, it doesn't matter, I'm not fine. I'm scared about the money and I've been scared for weeks and I keep pretending I'm not. Something happens in the body when you do that. A breath you didn't know you were holding finally goes out. The shoulders drop half an inch. Nothing about the money has changed, but the second bag, the exhausting bag of pretending, has been set on the ground. Jung would tell you that most people go their entire lives without ever setting that second bag down, and they can't understand why they're so tired. They keep looking at the first bag, the real problems, and thinking those must be the source of the weight. But you can carry real problems and still feel light if you're honest about them. And you can have almost no real problems and feel crushed if you're spending everything you have pretending. Now, why does something so simple feel so impossible? Because the truth about what you feel is often not the truth you want to be true. The strong one doesn't want to feel afraid. Fear contradicts the entire identity they've built. The generous person doesn't want to admit they're resentful, because resentment feels ugly and beneath them. The devoted partner doesn't want to notice the loneliness inside their marriage, because noticing it might mean something has to change. So the mind does something clever and cruel. It edits the feeling before it ever reaches your awareness. You don't consciously decide to lie to yourself. The lie arrives pre-installed, wearing the face of a mood you can't explain. Jung called this the material of the shadow, everything about ourselves that we've judged as unacceptable and pushed into the dark. And he was very clear that the shadow isn't evil, it's just exiled. It's the frightened parts, the angry parts, the needy and envious and grieving parts that didn't fit the version of yourself you decided to present. They don't disappear when you exile them, they wait, and they get expensive to keep locked up. This is the point where the simple habit stops being simple, because telling yourself the truth about what you feel means being willing to feel things you've spent years deciding you're not allowed to feel. It means letting the frightened part of you exist without immediately shaming it back into the basement. It means, as Jung put it in one of his most unnerving lines, accepting yourself completely, which he called, without exaggeration, one of the most terrifying things a person can do. The acceptance of oneself is the essence of the whole moral problem, he wrote, and the epitome of a whole outlook on life. That's a strange thing to say about a habit that's supposed to make life lighter, isn't it? The most terrifying thing is also the thing that lifts the weight. But that paradox is exactly what Jung spent his life trying to help people understand. Before we go deeper into why this is so hard, I want to name something, because if you've been feeling that particular heaviness, the kind that doesn't match your life, the kind you can't quite explain to anyone, you might already sense that this is pointing at something real in you. We put together a guide for exactly this, called True Self-Discovery. It's 24 reflection exercises drawn from Jung's work, built to help you gently start telling yourself the truth about what you're actually carrying, one honest question at a time. If the idea of setting the second bag down speaks to something in you, the link is right below. Now let me show you the turn in all of this, because there's a catch that nobody warns you about. Here's what most people expect when they hear, "Acknowledge your feelings and you'll feel better." They expect it to work like a drain. Name the sadness and the sadness flows out, and you feel relief. And sometimes, with smaller things, it works something like that. But with the things you've been carrying for years, the first honest acknowledgement often makes you feel worse before it makes you feel lighter. This is where almost everyone quits, and it's why they conclude the habit doesn't work. Think about it physically. If your leg falls asleep and you don't move it, you feel nothing. It's numb, and numb is comfortable in its own dead way. The pain only comes when the blood rushes back in. That flood of pins and needles isn't the injury, it's the healing. It's sensation returning to a place that had gone dark. But if you didn't understand that, you'd yank your leg back into the position that made it numb, because the numbness hurt less. That's precisely what happens the first time you let yourself feel something you've suppressed for a decade. The feeling comes back with the intensity of 10 years compressed into a single moment. You allow yourself to notice, just once, how lonely you've actually been. And it doesn't feel like relief, it feels like drowning. And the mind screams that this was a mistake, that feeling is dangerous, that you should go back to being fine. Most people listen to that voice. They shove the feeling down, the numbness returns, and they mistake the numbness for peace. Jung understood this so well. He knew that the confrontation with what you've buried is not gentle at first. What comes up isn't tidy, and it isn't flattering, and it doesn't announce itself politely. It arrives all at once because it's been waiting all at once. And the only thing that gets you through that first flood is knowing, in advance, that the intensity is the blood returning, that it's temporary, that it's the cost of the guard finally standing down, and that on the other side of it is a lightness you haven't felt in years. So the habit isn't quite as simple as name your feeling and float away. It's name your feeling and be willing to stay with what comes up long enough for the pins and needles to pass. The willingness to stay is the whole thing. That's the part that requires courage. That's why Jung called it terrifying and not just difficult. Let me give you a concrete version of what staying looks like, because it's less dramatic than you might imagine. A woman sits down at the end of a day that wasn't especially bad. She's about to do what she always does, which is scroll her phone until she's numb enough to sleep. Instead, she puts the phone face down and asks herself one honest question. What am I actually feeling right now? And the first answer that comes is nothing, I'm just tired, because the first answer is almost always the guard doing its job. But she waits, and a truer answer rises up underneath it. I feel invisible. I felt invisible for months, and I've been filling every quiet moment with noise so I wouldn't have to notice. She doesn't fix it. She doesn't make a plan. She just lets that be true for about 90 seconds, and it aches. And then the ache settles into something quieter, and she goes to bed feeling strangely lighter than she has in weeks. Not because anything changed, but because for the first time in months, she's not spending energy hiding from her own life. That's the entire practice. 90 seconds of not lying to yourself. And Jung would tell you that 90 seconds, done regularly, does more to lighten a person than years of forced positivity ever could. Now I want to spiral down one level deeper, because there's a reason this works that goes beyond just releasing suppressed energy. It has to do with projection, and this is where the habit stops just making you feel lighter and starts actually changing how you experience other people. Here's the mechanism. Everything you refuse to see in yourself doesn't just sit quietly in the dark. It gets cast outward, like a film projected onto whoever happens to be standing in front of you. The parts of yourself you can't tolerate, you start noticing everywhere in others, and reacting to them with an intensity that has nothing to do with the actual person. The colleague who irritates you far more than their behavior warrants. The friend whose neediness you find unbearable while you pride yourself on never needing anyone. The stranger whose confidence enrages you while you've spent your life shrinking. Jung's observation was that we don't see people. We see the parts of ourselves we've disowned, painted onto them, and carrying all of that projection is its own exhausting job, because now the whole world is populated with people who seem to embody exactly the things you can't stand, and every one of those encounters costs you. When you begin the habit of honest self-acknowledgement, something unexpected happens to your relationships without you doing anything to them directly. The person who once irritated you becomes, oddly, just a person. Because the irritation was never fully about them. It was your own disowned neediness, or anger, or fear, projected outward, coming back to sting you. Once you can admit, yes, I have that in me too, I feel that too, the projection loses its charge, the film stops rolling. And you'd be amazed how much of the heaviness in a life comes from being at war with reflections of yourself that you didn't recognize as reflections. This is why Jung insisted that the work of becoming honest with yourself wasn't self-indulgence. He saw it as the foundation of being able to actually love other people, rather than loving or hating the version of yourself you'd painted onto them. You can't see another person clearly while you're using them as a screen. And most of us are running projections on nearly everyone we meet all day without any idea we're doing it. Let me address the resistance directly, because by now some part of you might be thinking, this sounds nice in theory, but you don't have time to sit around feeling your feelings, and anyway you've gotten this far by pushing through, so why fix what isn't broken? That voice, the one saying you don't have time, that this is soft, that pushing through is the only respectable option, that voice is the guard. It's the exact mechanism keeping the bag in your arms. It has a vested interest in you never setting anything down, because setting things down means it's out of a job. And it will present its case very reasonably. It will tell you that if you let yourself feel the tiredness, you'll collapse and never get up. That if you admit the resentment, you'll become a bitter person. That if you acknowledge the fear, it'll take over. But Jung found the opposite to be true, over and over. The feelings you refuse to acknowledge are the ones that run your life from behind the curtain. The fear you won't look at is the fear that makes your decisions for you. The anger you won't admit is the anger that leaks out sideways at people who didn't earn it. Acknowledged feelings become information. Unacknowledged feelings become fate, that word again, the one Jung used so precisely. The whole reason unconscious material feels like destiny, like some external force shaping your life, is that you've refused to bring it into the light where you could actually work with it. There's a particular kind of person who needs to hear this next part. The one who's proud of how much they can carry. The one who's built an entire identity around not needing to fall apart, around being the dependable one, the composed one, the one who handles it. If that's you, I want to be honest with you the way Jung was honest with the people who came to him. Your strength is real, but a good portion of it is being spent on the wrong job. You're not just carrying your life, you're carrying the enormous additional weight of never being allowed to admit that your life is heavy. And you've carried it so long, you've mistaken the strain for who you are. You wouldn't call it heavy. You'd call it responsible. You'd call it maturity. You'd call it just how things are. But go back to Jung's line one more time. The unconscious will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Half the things you've decided are simply your personality, your permanent condition, the way you're built, are actually just feelings you've been guarding so long that you can no longer see them as separate from yourself. Here's the deepest layer, the thing underneath the lightness, underneath the projections, underneath all of it. The habit of telling yourself the truth about what you feel is the first step in what Jung considered the central task of a human life. He called it individuation, the slow process of becoming whole, of reclaiming all the parts of yourself you exiled in order to survive, and integrating them back into a self that's finally complete. Every feeling you refused to feel was a small self-betrayal, a moment where you decided that some part of your genuine inner experience was too dangerous or too shameful to keep. And a life is made of thousands of those moments, stacked up over decades, until the gap between who you actually are and who you're presenting yourself to be becomes so wide that maintaining it consumes almost everything you have. The weight you feel is, at bottom, the weight of that gap. Closing the gap is what makes life feel lighter, genuinely, permanently lighter, not the temporary lift of a good mood. Because you stop being two people at once. You stop being the presented self and the hidden self, each one requiring its own upkeep. You become one person, whose inside and outside roughly match. And a person who isn't split against themselves has a staggering amount of energy available that the rest of us are spending on the split. Jung didn't promise that this would make your problems vanish. He was too honest for that. He'd be the last person to tell you that honesty with yourself turns your life into something painless. What he understood was more valuable and more durable. When you stop spending your strength on pretending, you finally have enough of it left to face the things that are actually hard. The weight that lifts is the false weight, the manufactured weight, the weight of the performance, and what remains is a life you can actually carry, because you're only carrying what's really there. So let me bring this all the way down to the ground, to something you could genuinely do starting tonight, because Jung's ideas mean nothing if they stay abstract. Once a day, and once is enough to start, you stop, and you ask yourself a single question. What am I actually feeling right now? Then you wait past the first answer, because the first answer is usually the guard. You wait for the truer thing underneath, and when it comes, you name it in plain, ordinary words. Not spiritual words, not clinical words, the kind of words you'd use if you completely trusted the person you were talking to. I feel scared. I feel resentful. I feel lonely in a room full of people. I feel like I've been performing so long I don't know what I want anymore. You don't fix it. You don't solve it. You don't build a plan around it or interrogate whether you have the right to feel it. You just let it be true for a little while, the way you'd let a guest sit in your living room without demanding they justify their existence. And then you go on with your evening. That's the whole habit. It takes under 2 minutes, and Jung would tell you that those 2 minutes, repeated, do something that no amount of forcing positivity or gritting your teeth ever accomplishes. They slowly discharge the standing army. They call the guards home. They return your energy to you a little at a time, until one ordinary morning you notice you woke up, and the invisible thing that used to be dragging behind you simply isn't there, and you can't even remember exactly when you set it down. If any of this has landed in a place you didn't expect, if you've recognized yourself somewhere in it, that recognition is the honest acknowledgement already beginning. Our guide, True Self-Discovery, was made to carry that forward. 24 reflection exercises rooted in Jung's work, designed to help you keep asking the question and keep staying with the answers long enough for the weight to lift. It won't do the feeling for you. Nothing can. But it'll walk beside you while you learn to stop lying to yourself, which turns out to be the lightest a person can ever feel. You'll find it linked below.